Hi boys and girls, it's time for our next math lesson. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you have all of the materials that you're going to need. So again, you're going to need small square pieces of paper. Post-it notes work great, but if you don't have post-it notes, that's okay. You can always create your own squares out of paper. You're also going to need your big Geoboard paper. Today, you only need the big Geoboard paper. You don't need those mini Geoboard squares, just the big Geoboard paper. Also, it might be handy to have just a couple of blank sheets of paper. They can be blank computer paper like this or blank lined paper, just some paper that you can write on. In addition to these things, you probably also need some colored pencils, crayons, markers, some type of coloring utensil, and a pencil. All right, once you have those things together, come on back and let's get started. All right, so today we are going to continue talking about shapes and partitioning them into smaller pieces. Let's think about what that word partition means. Think to yourself, what does it mean? If you were thinking that partition means to split up or to divide up a shape or something into smaller pieces, you'd be correct. All right, so today we are going to be talking about partitioning shapes into thirds. The last couple of lessons we've been working on mostly squares, and we've done halves and fourths. Today we're going to talk about more than just squares, and we're going to be making thirds instead of fourths or halves. So just like our last couple of lessons, I'd like for you to take out your paper squares now. What you're going to be doing today with these squares is trying to split them into equal parts. And remember that equal parts means that each section or partition of the shape is the same size and that the three parts add up to a whole. So they have to be the same size, and when you put all three pieces together, it has to make up the whole square. So you are going to work with at least two squares, maybe three, to show me how you could partition these into three equal parts or into three thirds. Go ahead and get started on that now. You can fold, you can draw. If you have another way of showing me, that's fine too. Go ahead and begin working with these shapes. Once you've practiced splitting up your square into three equal thirds, then I would like for you to take your papers and either stick the post-it note right onto it or tape or glue the paper down. I even put an extra piece of tape right here so that it didn't fly up like this. All right, so let's talk about what we did here. I have one example for you. I'm hoping you also have at least one example. So I want you to think about your work and ask yourself a couple of questions. First, did you divide your square into three equal shares? Then, how do you know that those shares are equal? What I would like for you to do on your paper is to write down one of these two sentence starters. You don't have to write down both, and I want you to finish the sentence. You need to finish one of these sentence starters, okay? All right. Once you have chosen one of the two sentence starters, either I divided my square into equal parts by, or I know that the shares are equal because, I want you to complete that sentence. Tell me how you know that the shares are equal, or tell me how you divided the square. Please write it down on your paper. This will be an option for something you could submit as proof of completion. We are going to begin the digital Geoboard portion of our lesson just like we have with each of the other lessons. What I want you to do is start out on your square Geoboard. Make sure you're on the square and create a square using these digital rubber bands. Remember, we want the square to use up the entire Geoboard, just like that. We're going to start with the square today, but we are also going to be working with the rectangle and the circle. So the first thing that I want you to do is maybe think about what you might have shown me on your square paper, or you can think about a new way. And I want you to practice splitting up this square into equal thirds. So I'm going to make an example that looks like my paper squares from earlier.
I'm going to go like this. 1, 2, 3.
I want to do 3 rubber bands because that'll give me 3 sections, right? Wait a second. When I add 3 rubber bands, I actually end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So that's something that we have to pay attention to here. Just because you're using 3 rubber bands doesn't mean that you're going to end up with 3 sections. So I'm going to take one of these rubber bands off. I pressed the delete button to do that. I'm going to take this one off too. So I'm clicking it and then I'm deleting it. So let's see if I can split this up into 3 equal parts. Do these parts look equal? Not quite, right? This middle piece is a lot bigger than these top and bottom pieces. The way that this geoboard is set up, I don't think I can make it into 3 equal pieces. Look, even if I run it through right here, I can't because there's no hooks for me to put the rubber bands on. So I don't think that I can make this into an equally partitioned square that has thirds. It's possible to equally partition a square, right? Just like this. But I don't think I can do it in this geoboard. Let's try it with a rectangle. Go ahead and click onto your rectangle. Wow, this one has a lot more pegs. All right, see if you can create a rectangle that has 3 equal parts. A rectangle that's been split up into 3 equal parts. So maybe you want to use the whole board like this. That could be a little tricky with all of these dots. It's okay if you just want to use part of the board like this. So you can change the size of the board to be a size that you're comfortable working with, okay? It just needs to be a rectangle. Let's see, can we split this rectangle into 3 equal parts?
One rubber band there. One rubber band there.
Not quite. What if I take this up one? What if I try it like this? Does that look equal? I think that this one looks equal, right? You can kind of see that it has the same number of dots in each section. And if I was to cut out those pieces and stack them on top of each other, then it would look like this. Okay. The next thing I want you to do after you try a few rectangles, and see if you can do it in more than one way, would be to go over to the circle. And the circle looks like this. And I want you to see if you can make this circle into 3 equal parts. So you're going to start like this. We want to make this go over each part of the circle. We'll use this middle part to split it up. And I don't want to give it away how you might do it, but you're going to use this middle peg to sort of split up the circle. So you would need a few rubber bands to do this. You're going to split it up like this. Oops. Right? But you want to split it up into equal thirds. So you're going to drag over to the peg that you want to touch, and then it will connect it to the middle. So you're going to split this shape up into thirds as well. The reason that I asked you to pull out some blank paper is because I want you to record the ways that you've cut up these shapes. So I want you to have a paper that looks something like this. So your paper will look something like this. This is just a blank sheet of paper. At the top, I did squares. In the middle, I did rectangles, and at the bottom, I did circles. I want you to show me all the different ways that you come up with to split it up into thirds. You can copy these right down from your digital Geoboard. This could also be a great choice of something to upload to show that you completed your work. You do not have to use Geoboard paper today. You do not have to use it. I pulled this large sheet in case you would like to take a look at it, but you do not have to use it. This would be perfectly fine. All right, go ahead and work with your digital Geoboards and make sure you're recording your work on a piece of paper. All right, boys and girls, thank you so much for tuning in for this lesson. Before we finish up for today, I want to remind you of some of the core details and important parts of this math lesson that I want you to remember, okay? So the first thing is that there's more than one way to partition shapes to make thirds. The second thing I want you to remember is that 3 thirds make 1 whole. And the last thing that I want you to remember is that equal shares of identical wholes need not have the same shape. And we've talked about this a lot this week. Just because you've partitioned a square doesn't mean that the square is made up of little squares, right? This square is partitioned evenly into thirds, but the shapes that they're partitioned to are what? They're not squares. They're rectangles. All right, I added a little bit more information to our anchor chart that I wanted to show you today. So we started off this part of our unit with halves. And remember that halves are 2 shares that make up a whole. These are all examples of shapes that have been split in half. They have 2 shares, they're called halves, and there are 2 halves in a whole. Then we talked about fourths. These are all examples of shapes that have been split up into fourths. The number of shares when something is split into fourths is 4. They are called fourths, and there are 4 fourths in a whole. Today we talked about thirds, and thirds means that you're splitting it into 3 shares. It's called a third, and there are 3 thirds in a whole. You can see here that we have a rectangle, a square, and a circle that have been partitioned into equal thirds. So remember that there's more than one way that you can split up a shape, and that just because a shape is split up doesn't mean it has to be split up in the shape that it is. This square is not split up into squares. It is split up into rectangles. The partitions are partitions of rectangles, and they are equal. And that's what's important to remember from our lesson for today. All right, boys and girls, that wraps up our 3rd online math lesson. Make sure that you upload some type of proof of completion. That can look like this. That can also look like this. Or if you used your square Geoboard sheet to help support you, that is also an okay thing to upload to show proof of completion to your teacher. Go ahead and get that done and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching, boys and girls. Bye.